mute your microphone, please. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to webinar series of British Council and NELTA entitled Functional Language Teaching. Stay at home, continue to learn. Here today we have two presenters, Sujata Bancholi and Priya Iyer from India. Please allow me to briefly introduce the key presenters of today's webinar series. Sujata Bansole is an academic manager for schools, English and skills at the British Council and works on the teacher development projects in North India. She is a CELTA certified teacher and has a master's in elementary education from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. She has worked in English and education since 2010, gaining experience as a teacher, trainer, and as a materials developer, researcher for an educational technology project. Her research interests include pre-service teacher education, multilingual approaches in ELT. In her free time, she enjoys going for long walks, reading, and further. Similarly, Priya is an academic manager in schools, English and skills, East and Northeast India. Priya started her teaching career as a volunteer for the British Council Times of India Tech Indian Partnership in 2011. She then worked as a master trainer with Teach India as a consultant with Aga Khan Educational Services and worked as a British Council teacher training consultant and academic coordinator since 2014 on a range of SES projects across India. She has a Cambridge certification in English language teaching to adults CELTA. She has worked on large-scale teacher development projects in extremely challenging context in India. She speaks 6 Indian languages and enjoys reading, cooking, traveling in her free time. Without delay, may I request the presenters, Sujata, to further her presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ashok sir, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Priya and I are really honored to be here and presenting this webinar on functional language teaching to you all today. Before we begin, we would like to share a few things. The webinar is being recorded and the recording of this webinar will be sent to you by email tomorrow. For any further details on our programs, you could visit the British Council Nepal website at www.britishcouncil.org.np and the NELTA website at www.nelta.org.np. For attending this webinar, you will be receiving a certificate. This will also be emailed to you by tomorrow. You can type your name in the given space and download and print it. In the email tomorrow, you would also receive an evaluation and needs analysis form. We request you all to please complete this and share it with us. Your feedback is highly appreciated. Before we begin the session today, I'd like to also share some housekeeping rules. If you're not the speaker, we request you to keep yourself on mute. It is recommended that you switch off your video during the presentations. Please use the chat box in case you have any questions for the presenters. Use the raise hand button in case you have something important to share. So in our presentation today, we will first take you through the session objectives. We will first introduce you to language functions. What are language functions? What are functions and exponents? We will look at the teaching of functional exponents. We will look at the importance of register and appropriacy. How do students learn English? and we will have a look at the textbooks to see what English language teaching looks like. We will look at the challenges involved in teaching functional language and also look at some of the possible solutions for this. In the end, we will take you through some references and useful links. By the end of this webinar, you will be able to define language functions, list commonly used functions and their exponents, understand general strategies of the functional approach and its importance in language teaching. You will also use various ideas in planning a lesson with a functional approach. Right. So I would like you all to think about who did you communicate with this week? Who did you speak with or write to? Can you share some with us? What was the purpose of this communication? Can you tell us briefly in the chat? So my question was, think about who have you communicated with this week and what was the purpose of this communication? Okay, friends and relatives. Okay, someone said here, my son, to convince him to buy a notebook. With colleagues. Okay, with students in online teaching. Okay. A friend for wishing her on her birthday. Right. Okay, related to various activities. Okay. Communicated with my colleagues and students about the course book and remote teaching. Right. So as we can see, so we used language for interactional purposes. When we talk to friends or family, it could be, say, for small talk or conversations, like when we meet them either online or face-to-face these days, if it is possible. So it usually would begin with a greeting. There is some back and forth conversational exchanges. So it's all part of the social interactions that we all are part of. And some of you talked about, gave me another kind of a purpose, like, say, sharing information either through teaching your students or wishing someone a happy birthday. So there was a purpose to that, or it was transactional or functional use of language, wherein the focus was on getting something done. Some examples here are ordering food, buying something in a shop, or asking for information. So this is these are some examples of functional language. So how do we define language functions? Functions refers to the items of what items of language actually do in a real context, as opposed to what they might mean literally. It is the language that is required, say, to carry out different functions, which means you are communicating in to communicate effectively in a lot of different situations. The idea of teaching language by functions was initially proposed in the 1970s by D.A. Wilkins. So some examples of language functions are suggesting, inquiring, predicting, giving advice. Can you think of some more? Please type in the chat. Requesting, yes. Counseling, recommending, okay. Giving permission, asking for information, getting things done, warning, okay. Right. So lots of functions that you all seem to be aware of and have used. Yes. So it's all in terms of sharing information or the giving or the asking or giving of information. Now let's look at what are functions and their exponents. Priya? Hello, Priya?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Brilliant. Okay. So on your slide, you can see some functions and their exponents. So any guesses what exponents mean? Can you go to the previous slide, Sujata? Sorry. Yeah. So any guesses here in the chat? I'm not able to see the chat, Sujata, so you'll have to help me with reading the chat.
Yeah.
There's any, I can't see it.
Right.
Okay.
Represents what, ma'am? Someone said represents.
Okay, great.
I mean represents
So,
function perhaps, okay.
brilliant. It represents the function. Yeah, in simple terms, it does that. So there's a quick task for you. Use the chat box function and match the exponents on the left to the functions on the right. For example, number 1, which function do you think these exponents cater to? Is it apologizing? Is it giving advice? Is it making a complaint, or is it giving a compliment? So you can write 1A, 1B, or whatever, whichever you think is appropriate. Please use the chat box function for this.
I got the first answer in 1B.
Okay. That's right. 1 is B, that's giving advice. Brilliant.
2A, I can see 2A.
Excellent. And I'm not apologetic about it. It's perfect. 2 is A. So 1B, 2A, 3 and 4.
Okay, I see 4C here and 3D.
4C, obviously. Yeah. So 4C, 3D. Brilliant. So it's 1B, 2A, 3D, 4C. So if you notice here, each of these functions have quite a few exponents. There are different ways to express them. So we'll move on to the next bit now, where there's a very nice definition of function. Many of you have shared it already in the chat box. So it says an exponent is a piece of language that is used to perform a language function. So if you look at the previous examples, apologizing, giving a compliment, making a complaint, these were functions, and some piece of language was used to perform that particular function. And those pieces of language are known as exponents. They're known as functional exponents. For example, would you mind, or can you do something for me, are some exponents that are used for making requests. Can you pass the pen, please? Would you mind giving me the bottle of water? Yeah, we've given you some examples here on the slide for giving a compliment, which is a function, and making a complaint, which is another function. So if you read through these, you can see that these are pieces of language that are used to perform that particular function of either giving a compliment or making a complaint. So there's a lot of research that goes on about how these functions can be taught by teaching or focusing on these exponents itself, these chunks or pieces of language, so to say. So there's a lot of research that supports that you can teach them by teach your students functions by focusing on these pieces of language or by focusing on these chunks of language. Can we move to the next slide, Sujata? So here is a list of activities that Sujata and I thought would be nice if you can include these activities to teach language chunks. So again, there's a question for you. Do you know what language chunks mean? Have you used these in your classrooms? Have you focused on these in your classrooms? What do you think language chunks are? Again, Sujata, I'll need your help.
Yeah, I'm
Can't see
looking at the chat.
Sure.
Yeah, don't
Sure.
worry, I'm looking at the chat.
What are language chunks? Any guesses? Any idea? Okay. So language chunks are nothing but group of
There's one here
words.
that says,
Sure.
yeah, several words,
Absolutely.
phrases, short form. Someone else has replied short form.
Short forms. Okay. Okay. So they're nothing but, like somebody said, words that can be found together in any language. And it's not necessary that it's only in English. It could be across languages. Many languages have words that can be found together. They could be fixed collocations, or they could be words that commonly go together because they follow some grammatical rules. So, when we listen to any language, we usually pick it up in chunks, is what some theory suggests. There's a lot of research that suggests that. So, that is why many researchers who feel that there are many researchers who feel that you should teach language using language chunks. So, any function, may I come in, please? May I open the door for you? May I cook this for you? These are all pieces of language or language chunks. So if you focus on the entire chunk than telling them, okay, this, remember this word, then remember this word, remember may for permission, maybe it works better that for if you use language chunks. And some of the activities that we thought, first one would of course be role plays. You could get a lot of role plays into your classroom to teach and practice language chunks or to teach and practice functions. The other activity that we thought would be a mingle. Getting your students to mingle in the classroom is a good idea to give them enough practice to speak to different people in the same context to practice language functions. A mill drill activity, which is an interesting extension of a drill. All of us are familiar with drilling, but this would be with some cue cards or some support for drilling. So mill drill is another one. Can you think of any more? Any more activities that you can think of that can practice language chunks or functions in the classroom? Please use the chat box to answer. Any communicative language teaching
There's a reply, Priya.
Sure.
Simon says is one.
Okay. Simon
Simulation
says.
activities.
Okay.
Using flashcards is another.
That's nice. Yeah. Okay, you can have the flashcard with maybe a prompt, and you can get your students to form that function or use that, exponent. So you say, or you could have the function up on the flashcard, and the student can give you the exponent. Lovely.
Memory chunks is also reply.
Lovely.
Okay, there are some of you who have some questions here. So I'm sorry, I should have highlighted this initially. We will have a Q&A session at the end of this. So please park your questions, please note them and ask us in the end. We will have at least 20 minutes for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Sujata. So yeah, memory chunks. There's a lot of focus on mnemonics also when you learn language chunks. There are many theories that are going around about which is the best approach. So we'll share at the end reference links for you to read up a little more. But these are some of the activities that we came up with, and you've added to that list. Thank you so much for that. And we'll now move on to another important aspect of functional language teaching, which is register and appropriacy.
Yes, thank you for that, Priya. Uh, so as you saw from the slides that Priya presented, that there is no one-to-one match between form and function. A function can have, one function can have different structures, which is to say, for example, the function of suggesting something. So I could say, why don't we watch a film? Or we could say, let's watch a film. Or perhaps, shall we watch a film? We could watch a film. So as you can see, there can be no one-to-one match between the form and the function. And so it is important, therefore, to present the language in context. In order to teach the function, it is important that the language is presented in context. Uh, and, uh, and it is important also to analyze this context and the relationship between the speakers here, which we call appropriacy. And therefore, this has an implication on the choice of language according to the level of formality. So once we know what the context is, we see what the relationship between the speakers are, there is the question of register or the choice of language according to the level of formality. So for example, a grammar item such as would can express different functions. That's a form expressing different functions. So one could say, would you like another cup of tea? That's in the context of a social situation, and this is the function of offering something. I'd get the green one if I were you. Perhaps in the context of shopping, where friends are giving advice to each other. Granny would always tell us bedtime stories in the context of a family conversation, perhaps talking about past habits or nostalgia. Would you by any chance be available next week? That's in the context of work, perhaps, making an appointment. So as you can see, the register would depend on being very clear about the context. So once the context is established, it will be helpful for students to understand what should be the register of these sentences while expressing functions. So, how do students normally learn English? We all know that teachers tend to present the grammar structure through a short text. What you can see here on your screens is an example from a class 4 textbook of the Nepal government. Maybe some of you are familiar with this. The grammar that is being presented here, the structure is, oh, what a big elephant. Stop, don't go near. After this, there is a practice exercise, a controlled practice, where students use the same grammar structure in a controlled way. So as you can see, some clues are given, what / big / tiger. Students have to look at that and create the same, practice the same grammar structure. Later, there is an opportunity for students to produce language by using the new structure. perhaps in different contexts. So as you can see in the third image, don't get on the bus. Why? It's moving. That's a scaffold that is given, and there are some exercises for the students to look at and practice and produce on their own. So this is the usual way that students are learning language, that is the PPP method, or also known as the grammar translation method. But we all know that we are slowly moving away from the PPP structure, because there is now an increased focus on communicative competence rather than linguistic competence, and which is where the importance of teaching language functions comes in. Now let's look at a textbook from class 8. Priya?
Thanks, Sujata. So very rightly said about the presentation practice production approach that most of us follow, or most of us have been taught using also many a times. We try to look into your textbooks and to find out how much of focus on functions there is already. And we looked at the English textbook for grade 8, and this is an extract from page 8 of your English textbook. This is unit number 2, I think. There's a unit on travelogue, if I'm not wrong. If you, in using the chat box function, can you please let us know? Sorry, did someone say something? No, okay. Using the chat box, could you please let us know if you use this lesson or this particular extract to teach functions in your classroom? Have you done it already? Have you taught functions using this particular extract in your textbook? This is class 8, grade 8, unit 2, page number 8.
Yes, some of them are replying positively
Okay.
that they have done this. Yes, they are
Okay,
familiar
okay.
with it. Yeah.
Lovely. That's good to know. And have you followed the same sequence that is given here in this extract? So you start with that example, then you move on to the second activity. Did you do the same? Or did you adapt it? Okay. Any responses, Sujata? Any
No, not.
adaptation? No. Okay.
There is a yes here, but I think that's about the
For the
familiarity with the
previous.
textbook. Yes.
Sure, sure. Okay. So we've tried to put, come up with a suggested lesson plan for this particular activity. And we have it on the next slide for you. I'll share that with you and I'll talk you through this. So here is the extract on the right hand side. So obviously when you start any lesson, we start by setting the context of the lesson, leading into the lesson by either giving an example or giving some language structure that we think we will focus on in future. So here, if you see, I'm just using the same extract and taking you through a suggested lesson plan. So on the right hand side, activity number 1, the first one, the examples with Namuna and Nibun can be your context setting and leading in. You can start with some warmer and a lead in, and then you could move to the next stage, which is getting them some language practice. So you presenting the target language. So whatever is given with in the conversation between Nibun and Namuna is your target language that you want your students to focus on. And you will give them that target language using the example in activity 1, post which we normally drill the target language. We conduct either a chain drill, a choral drill. You get individual students to repeat the sentence for you and board the language. You put it up on the board so that students can fall back on it when they practice in controlled situations in the next stage. Any guesses on what the next stage could possibly be here? after you've presented the target language to your students, what do you think they should be doing? You've set the context, you've given them the target language, you've drilled the target language, and it's up on the board for them. What should be the next step in any lesson? Any answers there?
No, not yet. But let's wait a
Sure, I'll
little.
give
I
this.
think,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, there
sure,
is sometimes a lag.
sure.
Okay, there's one reply now saying student work.
Absolutely. Student work. Do you mean to say students practice now? Okay. Any other responses, Sujata?
Uh, no, there's just that the gentleman replied yes, that they work. Okay.
Okay,
Okay, there are some questions coming in.
sure.
Observe is another answer.
Okay, students observe. So we have
Okay, there
presented
was
the target.
there's role play.
Okay,
There's one reply called says role play. Another one saying production activity, I suppose. Production it
okay,
says.
lovely. So they produce the language. Very
Okay,
nice. So
another
you
answer saying role play.
brilliant. Okay, so role play is an activity to practice the language, right? So you could use a role play. You could use a mingle, like we said before, to get your students to practice the language. So we've also got the same answer as you. Students role play and practice using the situations in 2A and 2B. So if you notice, activity number 2 has many situations, out of which 2A and 2B, I think, refer to the previous example. They are in the same context. Like Sujata mentioned earlier in her slide, it's very important to maintain the context for your students for them to be able to pick up the language easily. If you keep varying the context throughout, so you present your language in a particular context, then in the practice you suddenly change the context for them, and in the production you give them a completely new context. Students, especially lower level students, which we usually engage with, tend to not focus so much on language learning then. So it's important that you vary the context slightly in the production stage, but until the practice stage, you still stick to the context. You don't suddenly change it from, giving so suppose you've given input on uh, ask requests, for example, and suddenly in the practice stage, you're asking them to use functional language for making a complaint. Do you think that's fair on your students? Do they know what they're supposed to do? Do they have the language for what you're asking them to do? So it's important that you maintain the context. So while the students are practicing and doing their role play bit, you as a teacher monitor them and of course support them and make a note of any common errors that come up in your observations. You can then use these during your error correction time at the end of this practice. And finally, once you know, okay, they've practiced, you've corrected their errors, they know everything about it, it's time to produce in a freer setting. So here is where you can play a little with the context. So if you've done asking for permissions in a formal setup, maybe you could get them to think of asking for permission in an informal setup. So, that way they practice the register, the appropriacy, all that comes in the production stage. So this is, of course, like Sujata mentioned earlier, we this is a suggested lesson plan, like I mentioned also. Uh, you We've just given this as a reference point for you, and we looked at the textbook for grade 8, and each of your units has some inbuilt function, focus on functional language in it. So maybe you can try this out in some other lesson, in some other unit that you're teaching in future, and share amongst each other as to how you find this approach.
Right.
Uh, yeah, I think moving on, of course, when we have lessons, we teach, when we teach anything, we have challenges, and of course that's true for teaching language functions too. There are many challenges, and Sujata will take you through some of them.
Yeah, thank you for that, Priya. So, as Priya just said, that there are challenges in teaching different uh, kinds of things when we are teaching English. In the context of teaching functions, it seems that many of you have some experience of teaching language functions. So, what are some challenges that you have faced, or what do you think are the challenges to teach language functions effectively? Okay, students' backgrounds and their native language, yes. Lack of participation of the students, okay. Students' hesitation to speak, uh, that's right.
Anything specific to functional language teaching?
Yes, because a lot of things that are being mentioned here are, challenges that students anyway face in an English language class. And it seems to be pretty similar, contexts are pretty similar across South Asia, is what we are aware of. Students, yes, students cross-cultural backgrounds, the teacher skills, a phobia of English, that's right, time management, overloaded courses. But from what you've heard us talking about teaching language functions, especially in the last slide, where we gave you a lesson plan, where we presented a lesson plan for teaching functions. What is the challenge you foresee there with your students? What you're mentioning here is very valid, of course, and all of you as teachers know your contexts better. Okay, no one-to-one relation between form and function tends to be a
Brilliant.
challenge. Absolutely. Thank you for that. That's right. Okay. So yes, lack of participation, hesitation, transferring native languages. Yes, of course, this will even happen in a functional language lesson. But with our focus on teaching functional language, like one of you also said, there is no simple hierarchy of difficulty. You all seem to be very aware of what are language functions. So which ones should students learn first tends to be something that teachers find a little difficult or confusing. What do I teach my class 4 students versus my class 6 students? What do I teach students who are at a basic level or at an intermediate level and then at an advanced level? What functions should I introduce them to? Defining functions can sometimes be difficult because they tend to have either a very broad or a narrow definition, and therefore to incorporate functions in a lesson can be a challenge. Uh, from the slide on functions and exponents, as you saw that there can be many exponents for a single function. So which ones do we teach? How do we choose that? Which one of these functions is more natural, given that the focus of teaching functions tends to be for communication, for improving the students' communicative competence? Which one is more natural? Do we go by what is more natural versus teaching something that is easier? So deciding this can be sometimes difficult for teachers. Sometimes there can also be too much focus on function at the cost of interpersonal language. We looked at how there are two kinds of language use initially. So in the transactional one, we said that that is for social interaction, for chit chat, for small talk. Uh, should we not be teaching that? Of course we should be. So, the mix of how much to focus on functions versus on interpersonal communication can also be sometimes a challenge. And choosing the context, like we said, it is this has an implication for the register and the tone, which is equally important, as you all know, when we are teaching students language for communication. So sometimes this can be the spectrum of functions and the registers to use can be very broad and confusing, especially for learners at lower levels. If you have any other challenges, you can still please type in the chat and let us know. So we looked at the challenges of teaching functional language. So are there any solutions to this? Well, we came up with a few. You could also type in some in the chat. Any suggestions that you may have a practical involvement is a suggestion, okay? Right. Right. So it's better to mix the functional language throughout the curriculum rather than focusing on just a few lessons at a time. It will be good if it is woven through all the lessons in the English language syllabus. One of the ways in which you can do this, an example of this could be by selecting a context that remains the same throughout the course book, and then choosing a few exponents for the function that we want to focus on. So the scenarios could be the context could be the same. Scenarios could be different. For example, if it's the function of asking time, so it could be about asking a friend for the time, or asking the teacher about the time. So by giving it a little thought on how we could weave it in so that it becomes easier for students to also make the connections and making it more meaningful for them. In the practice stages, you could focus on how structures can be adapted according to the scenario. So, for example, the sentence stem can remain the same, but in a different scenario, it could change. So, for example, what a lovely dress, what a brilliant film, uses the same sentence stems, you know, but there is a difference in the structures here. And so you also select the exponents. As we saw that there are many exponents for a function, one could perhaps select the exponents with the grammar that students can understand more easily. They may not have, learned it perhaps, but something that they can understand through the presentation of the function. And also always remember that in a functional language lesson, the focus should be on communication, not on the presentation of the grammar structure. So this brings us to the question at the end of our presentation. So why teach functional language, Priya? Priya,
A
you're
quick
on
check.
mute. You'll have to repeat.
Sure.
Okay, am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, sorry. So I said we've been talking a lot for the last 20-25 minutes about what functional language is, what exponents are, what is register, appropriacy, and we've also shared a suggested lesson plan with you. But why exactly? I mean, why should you teach functional language? Why is it so good, or why is it important to focus on it? When Sujata and I were discussing, we thought it allows for focus on communication. So including it in the syllabus helps you to focus more on communication, because you're giving them a purpose to speak, right? When all of us speak, we are either describing something, we are requesting for something, we are agreeing with someone, we are disagreeing with someone, we are trying to negotiate, we are trying to convince, we are trying to persuade. All these are functions. So whenever you speak, you perform some function. So what better way to increase communication in your classes than use of authentic language for that communication? Hence, we think functional language is really important. We think it provides a ready toolkit to use in particular situations. So if you equip your students with exponents for all of these functions, as we saw in your grade 8 textbook, there's a range of functions. And if your students have exponents for all these functions, so they have a toolkit. Okay, they know I'm supposed to agree here. Okay, I need to say this. I'm supposed to be convincing someone here. This is my, my weapon. My exponent is my weapon to convince someone. It provides a context for teaching higher level grammar. So when you go into the grammar teaching for functions, it gives you a context to teach that grammar in a purposeful way, in an authentic way, rather than in isolation. So this is why we think functional language is important. If you have other thoughts, please feel free to share it in the comments. With that, we move to the the fag end of our presentation before we open the floor to questions and answer some of your already asked questions. Yeah. Sujata?
Yes. So on your screen, these are some references that you could look at when you. I think we will be sharing. The team will be sharing the PDF of our presentation today. So you could look at these references that we have referred to for our presentation today. Also, these are some of the useful links where you could explore more resources for your own English language teaching. Also about some of you could connect with us on Facebook or on Twitter, and also look up some of the online courses that we offer through FutureLearn for developing teachers' language and teaching skills. So thank you everyone for our for coming here and listening to our presentation today. So we now open the floor for your questions.
Can we unmute and ask?
It'll be nice
Or
if
it
you
should
could
be like
type
that.
it. If you, it'll be
Sarita ji,
nice.
are you there? Could you please pick up the 4 questions?
Yeah, our
Sure.
moderators are here.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Before we have a quick check, please, dear participants, please write down your question in the chat box. We would entertain the written questions. First question from it goes with this: what do you think teaching language? Do you focus in form or function? Which one you need to focus more? It's up to you.
Good one. Sujata, you want to take that?
Yes. So, like I was telling you, most of our textbooks, not just in Nepal, the example that we used, but also here in India, the focus is mostly on form, has been on form. However, we have all seen that there is a move away from the focus on form to the focus on function, given that we are all trying to make our students be able and ready to communicate in English when they leave schools, at least. Of course, we are also looking at them being able to do that when within their school spaces as well. So therefore, it is more important, I feel, to focus on the function. However, it doesn't mean that even though when we are teaching functions, it doesn't mean that form isn't important. When you're teaching functions for communicative competence, the focus is fluency. However, as you move with it to higher levels, the focus on form is equally important. There is also, concepts like the noticing of language that happens as you teach this. That is why incorporating it through functions it makes more sense perhaps to the students themselves, because like we said in the last slide, it becomes like a ready toolkit for students, when they have to step out in their real life experiences.
Thank you. Over to Sarita ma'am. Do you have any questions, please?
Yeah, some people have asked some questions here, like what is meal drill?
Sure. Sujata, I'll take that one and you can
Sure,
add.
of
So,
course.
what is a mill drill? Like I said when I was explaining it, um, you everybody is familiar here with drills. We usually get students to repeat sentences after us, or they repeat after their peers, so that there is reinforcement and there is consolidation of a particular structure, language structure. A mill drill is a similar activity, slightly varying in the sense that a mill drill has some cue cards, so you would still get your students to repeat particular language structures, but there is a cue card or a prompt card, like a flashcard or something that is written on a piece of paper. For example, if I want them to go around doing a mingle activity, they already have something like, I don't know if you can see this. No, I don't think you can. So, their name, the age, their email ID written on a sheet of paper. Each student has one. They go around the class. You've drilled the target structure. What's your name? My name is. And what's your email ID? How do you spell it? Could you repeat that, please? You've done all this drilling. And when they're going around, they're doing the mill drill where they're asking these questions and answering these questions repeatedly. That's why it's known as the mill drill. They're doing it on repeat mode to reinforce that target language. Sujata, anything to add here?
Yeah, just to add here, the difference between drilling and mill drill is simply this, as Priya just said, that students are going around, they have been given this structure that they have already practiced. They go around practicing it with their peers in the classroom. So, milling around as they drill. That's how it comes to mill drill. So it's the same thing, but instead of hearing it repeatedly from the teacher and then repeating after, the drilling happens between students, and the teacher can actually give them more than one structure to practice with. That again depends on the teacher and her understanding of the level of her students.
Absolutely. And I think it makes the class more learner centered and more, learning more autonomous instead of the
Yes.
Yeah.
teacher leading the drill.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sujata ji and Priya ji. Similarly, another question is similar like this. Like, what is mnemonics?
Sorry, what is
Mnemonics.
mnemonics? Okay. Yes,
Yes.
Sujata.
I, I would not be able to really respond to that because can
So
you,
I'll,
Priya,
I'll,
try? Yeah.
so basically, I, when I think of mnemonic, I remember one that my mom taught me when I was young. And it was about these planets, the planetary, to remember the
System. Yeah.
planets. So there
Yeah.
was this,
Yeah.
my very educated mother just showed us 9 planets. So all the first letters, so Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, all of them. So that makes a mnemonic. It's anything, basically, if you do a quick Google search for mnemonics, it'll tell you it's any device which helps you remember. It's got to do with memory. It helps you remember
Yeah. It's a
anything
memory
easily.
technique,
Yeah,
basically.
it's
Yeah.
a memory technique. Sorry, not a device. Yeah, it's a technique that helps you remember anything in an easy way. So you would have used many of these in your uh, school years, college years. So similarly, when I was talking about drilling and memory and chunking, it's a mnemonic device. When you learn language in chunks, there's a lot of research that Scott Thornberry and many other ELT personalities have spoken about, and which support mnemonics and learning through chunking, because it aids in memorization more than a student would learn isolated words. Yeah, I hope that answers your question about what mnemonics is.
Okay, thank you. There is another question by Sapna Timaria. She says, how do you convince the drilling really help to develop language function? If their input is wrong, what is the use of it?
That's where the role of the teacher is very important, because when she sets up this activity, she has to go around monitoring. And like we said in the lesson plan for a function, the teacher would monitor so that she does a delayed error correction. And also she can also do the error correction then and there when if she realizes that the structure that the student is practicing is actually wrong. So monitoring is very important for setting up any activity. Of course, before that is all these things about giving clear instructions, checking those instructions, etc. But within this context, about what you have asked, I would say the teacher's role as a facilitator while she monitors when the activity happens is extremely important.
Yes, ma'am. Hello. Hello. Yes.
Any more
Sure, we
questions?
can hear you. We can hear you, and I don't think there is much more questions regarding things. And one question was there that we can go furthermore. How can
Sure.
we relate the Western practices of language function to the Eastern practices? Well, this is a broad question, but if you like, you can answer it. Over to you. Thank you.
The Western practice of language function to the Eastern practice of?
Language
Of the
function.
same language functions, how can we integrate that? It's over to you.
Right. As we have been saying, the most important aspect of teaching functional language is setting the context. So, while we were preparing for this presentation, we went through some of the Nepal textbooks, and we were very happy to see that, you have tried to contextualize this, look at, real experiences of Nepalese children might be while designing those lessons. So similarly, when you are teaching any aspect of English language, setting the context becomes very important. If sometimes you feel that the context that is there in the textbook, perhaps the lesson, perhaps a story or a situation itself, say for example, if you're teaching class 4 or 5 students, something about asking time, and if it is done in the context of say a conversation happening between colleagues in an office, that's not something that students might readily associate with. However, if it is something which is done in the context of the teacher asking time or expressing her displeasure because a student is late, the expression, if you say what time is it, uh, could have a literal meaning, what time is it, but when said in that in the tone of expressing your emotions of not being upset, say, what time is this the time to come to school or something like that. So I would say setting a context becomes very important. So like I said, our textbooks have been trying to incorporate all this. We seem to be moving towards communicative competence, focusing on that. But it is important to be careful of the contexts there. Priya, anything you would like to add here?
I think you've covered it really well.
Okay.
Brilliant. Do we have any more questions, sir?
I also
Sure.
saw not a question, but from our audience today, I can see that many of you are uh, very aware of teaching of functional language. There was someone who said that, when we were covering the PPP method, I think saying that this is being done inductively with
Lovely.
conversation. So yes, absolutely. Our focus tends to be more inductive, or the teaching tends to be more inductive. Just presenting the language. Perhaps question could be, what is the situation in which this? So what is the function that is being expressed, used here, etc. As compared to the deductive, aspect that we are trying to focus on, or books try to incorporate these days, where you give them a situation and ask them to deduce, or deduce it through a role play, or practicing dialogues, etc. So very happy to see such an aware and wonderful audience.
Can I pick up
Thank
one
you.
questions for you? Just a
Sure.
minute.
Sure,
Also,
sure, sure.
yeah, it's from Manoj Kumar Bhattrai. He asked
Sure.
the question that, is there mother tongue intervention in learning language function? Can we mix the language for teaching that?
Sure.
Priya, would you like to go for? Yeah.
Sure, sure. I'll go for it and you can add, Sujata.
Sure.
Uh, I think mother tongue
Okay.
intervention, if it's there for everything, right? I mean, whenever you teach any second language, or when we're learning
Okay.
any second language, mother tongue intervention is bound to be there, and it holds true for learning language functions also. So there's a lot of emphasis
Okay.
now
Okay, ma'am.
on acquiring uh, a second language or a foreign language, especially in the primary years of teaching, through the mother tongue. So there's no harm in using some mother tongue in the initial years or in the primary years of learning for children, and gradually moving to learning the language that is supposed to be learned. Sujata, anything to add?
No, absolutely. That's a mixing, or using, say, the translingual methods, for example, to teach functions is also
Absolutely fine.
is very much acceptable these days, and should be done where you feel that it'll be difficult for learners to understand. And of course, then slowly move away by replacing that with English, which students anyway pick up. But it is
Absolutely.
important that as always, the teacher will have a good understanding of her students. So knowing your learners is very important, and their comfort with
True,
learning the language.
true.
Thank you, Sujata and Priya. Also, Ji, it's over to you.
Thank you.
I think it's
Thank
time
you.
for a word of thanks.
Sure. Thank you, presenters, Sujata and Priya, for your wonderful presentation. Thank you, dear participants, for your questions, queries, patience, and remaining throughout the session. Please join NELTA British Council joint webinar series for further professional growth. If you like to take the recordings of this webinar, please explore British Council Nepal YouTube channel or NELTA YouTube channel for further recordings. Thanks, Radhaji, Vikas Rimal, and British Council entire team, and from NELTA, President Motikala Supadevan, Satyadevan, and all the NELTA members, life members present here. Your
Thank you
interaction was
very
really valued.
much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you
Safe,
very
Thank
much,
Thank you,
you.
sir.
everybody.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Priya,
thank
Thanks
you
a
any
very
lot.
last
much.
words?